Dzień dobry, nazywam się Kinga Knap i miło mi jest powitać Państwa w imieniu Wydawnictwa Naukowego PWN na drugim dzisiaj wykładzie Kongresu Języków Obcych. Cieszę się bardzo, że w ferworze przygotowań do nowego roku szkolnego, rad pedagogicznych i tak pięknej pogody za oknem zdecydowali się Państwo być z nami. Ponieważ musimy zachować dyscyplinę czasową, ja nie będę przedłużać wstępu i zostawiam Państwa w rękach najlepszego specjalisty w dziedzinie nauczania języka angielskiego, doktora Piotra Steinbricha. Witamy, Piotrze, i życzę Państwu miłego wykładu.
Okay, thank you. I will speak English as I usually, almost always do. I see we still have people joining us, but as Kinga was saying, we're kind of pressed for time. So without further ado, I want to say hello to everyone. Thank you for joining us. I know it's a beautiful day outside, at least where I'm sitting in Lublin. The bad news is that the holidays are almost over, and I know that some of you have to go to different meetings at school, and the holidays ended some time ago. What I am going to talk about in this presentation is basically some practical stuff. It's called Teaching Reboot Energizing Activities for a Fresh Start. The whole presentation is going to be gearing around some ideas and some activities that you could use with your students. Not necessarily for a fresh start, not necessarily at the beginning of the year. I think these activities will be valuable. I hope they'll be valuable and useful for you in your teaching throughout the whole year. We've got about 50 minutes, so I will not be really talking extensively about theory or anything like that. I'll just try to support activities with some rationale that is behind them. And then, obviously, if you like it, you might want to try it out at home and see how, not in school actually, and see how it's going to work in your context. Before I start, however, before I move on to the nitty-gritty of this presentation, I'd like to make a couple of disclaimers. The first one is this: I do not hate Matura, but I don't love Matura either. We've got the results right now. We know that the exams are over. We know that the results are not that different from what we experienced in the past years, last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, etc. My observation is that the exam does not really differentiate between exceptional students, very good students, and good students. If you look at the statistics, you'll know what I mean. The mean is horrifyingly high at about 70-some%, and the median is even higher. Basically, it seems that the students do not need that much preparation for the exam, but instead they need focus on language and preparation at the same time. So this is what I'm going to talk about. Energizing activities, what does that mean? It's going to be, I'm going to use the ideas which are based on, or which are related to, or which are extending the tasks which are found in the exam and then also in the materials that prepare the students for the exam. I'll be focusing on some examples, but just some examples from our repetitorium that some of you may be familiar with. Energizing activities are characterized by two principles. Principle one is the content principle, and I believe that the content should be generated from the learners, at least some parts of it, at least what is not given in the materials. And the form, and by form I mean the format, but also the language, will be provided by the teacher. So it's in a way kind of co-constructing what's going on in the classroom, what's going on with each of those ideas and activities. Thirdly, as you will see, most of the tasks, most of the activities I have prepared for you and I'd like to share with you are based on the principle that we start off as a collaboration task, as a collaborative task, where the learners are working together, or the learners are working together and with the teacher, and then we're moving on to individual work, because we know that language production is individual and it is collaborative, because usually we use language with something in mind, usually to talk to other people or to understand other people, but it's an individual who produces language. Also, in the exam context, work is individual, or at least is meant to be individual, hence the collaboration to individual work principle. Then I'm going to address all 4 skills which are found in the exam, and these are the classics. This is the listening, this is the reading, writing, and speaking. And some of you may ask, how about language use? Which are those środki językowe that we and our students love so much. And I'm not going to talk about these. I've done a talk about them. I've done a talk about use of language. I've done a talk about integrating grammar and vocabulary into Matura preparation. So I'm sure there's a presentation available. I know it's available for the users of Cambridge materials and PWN materials, but I believe it's also available for the registered users who attend our conferences and sessions, including the online one. So if you're interested, you could always ask, and you shall be given, or at least you should be given. So this is the second premise. This is basically the agenda around which I organized today's presentation, today's talk. And I would like to also focus on some preliminary premises. You may recognize the person in the photograph. It's Scott Thornberry, one of the cleverest people I've ever met in the ELT world, in the ELT business. And in one of his publications, he made some, what I consider extremely important and relevant statements as to how to go about teaching, as to what the classroom context should be like. And the first thing he said was that the learner is the most valuable classroom resource. It's not the materials, it's not the books that you use, it's not the things that you find on the internet, it's the learner. So basically the content is this amalgamation of what is to be found in the materials and what the learner brings into the classroom, and how he kind of puts these together to arrive at meanings and to arrive at language production. This is one of the commandments I'm going to live by, and I'm going to work by in this talk. Secondly, the lesson, he said that the lesson is co-constructed by the teacher and the learners on the spot. And I'm kind of skeptical about that one. I do believe that the lesson is co-constructed by the teacher and the learners, but I don't believe it's happening on the spot, or at least not to the extent to which Scott would like it to happen. We know, and you know, that a lesson is never the same, that one group with a particular lesson does it differently than another group that you teach with exactly the same lesson. So it's the result of this co-construction on the spot, but the extent is questionable. Then the third important premise is that the experience amounts to constantly sharing and exchanging ideas. So whatever a student experiences, whatever a student reads, whatever a student is listening to, whatever a student is watching, becomes part of their experience. And this part of this experience is shaping performance, is shaping what the students are saying, is shaping what the students are writing, both in terms of content and in terms of form. And lastly, again, according to Scott, the role of the teacher, except for all this managerial stuff that we have to do, is basically a conversational pal, a fully fledged, I said, conversational pal. So that means that whenever the students are engaged in a task that involves speaking, then the teacher should become part of it and should be a fully fledged conversational speaker, rather than the assessor, or rather than the person who focuses just on the language that the students are producing. So these are the four commandments, the four premises that I would like to observe in this presentation. And as you will see, together with those ones presented in the previous slide, that all of the ideas and all of the activities which I'm going to start off showing right now follow these principles. One important thing I should mention is that I'm going to share with you two activities that I had shown before. I showed them at the PACE Congress in May. These will come towards the end of the presentation. So if you happen to see this talk, if you happen to see this presentation at PACE, then it's going to be just a refresher for you. Well, if you haven't, if you didn't go there, then so much the better for you. And occasionally I'll be having water because I'm trying when I'm speaking. So starting off with reading, I said I'm going to address different skills, and I thought that reading could be the first skill that I would like to talk about, I'd like to address, and it's because reading is a problematic skill for a number of reasons. Reason number one is that what we do in the classroom when it comes to reading, what we do in school in general when it comes to reading, there's no resemblance as to what reading looks like in teenagers' real lives. They read different things, they read them differently. I know that they are forced to read, for example, obligatory literature in the Polish classes, but reading is different. Reading in the classroom is different from reading in the, say, real world. Then the second problem, something I'm attending to on a rather regular basis, is that reading comprehension activities are becoming kind of mechanical for the learners. Mind you that the learners, when they get to grade 4 secondary school, they had been doing English for 12 years, which is a whale of time. Really. And starting from grade 5 or 6, they are confronted with the same type of reading tasks. Reading for gist, reading for specific information, reading for detail, recently mediation reading tasks. So they basically learn the strategy of doing reading, of handling the task itself without really going into the depth of the text. And this is what I consider a major problem, because what happens is that we do reading without really students reading properly. So this section addresses this problem, at least to a certain extent, and also will offer you some ways of going about reading with your students. I would like to start off by showing you one of the tasks from Repetitorium in the section called Twój ruch. Again, if you're using it, you know that the Twój ruch section is it goes after all the preparation thing, all the preparation stages, and that this is this kind of product part after the students have been through the process. So we've got two different texts on a particular topic, and the students are supposed to do the tasks that go with those two texts. And the tasks are typical exam tasks, so you probably know them better than I do, so I'm not going to show them to you. These are our texts: A Lifeline in Rural Bangladesh and Poor Ellen. And as you can imagine, these are not the texts that the students would like to read on their own. However, they are interesting on their own and by their own right. So we've got those two texts, we've got the tasks that go with those two texts. And after we've done those tasks, we know that the learners, as I was saying earlier, that the learners will not necessarily have read the text in in depth. They will not have read the text the way we'd like them to have read the text. So before the comprehension check, you can ask each learner to write down in Polish what the gist of the text is. In Polish, because it kind of resembles this new thing in the exam, the mediation part of the reading section that the students are supposed to do. And we would like the students extract the essence from those two texts. So we want them to write only 2 or 3 sentences that summarize the text, that give the main idea or the main thesis of the text, and then in pairs they have to compare their notes, compare their sentences. If you're brave enough, you can ask them to record a voice message instead of writing. But I know that in certain schools, in certain contexts, the use of mobile phones is not really allowed. So probably we should stick to writing, which is a more traditional way of doing things with the learners. Now, what it does, in order to get the essence from the text, in order to be able to synthesize it, you've got to read it to understand what the gist, what the main point of each text is. As we're dealing with 2 texts, we can actually do it as a pair work activity where one of the learners is reading text 1 and the other learner is reading text 2, and then they are comparing their notes, and then it kind of prepares them for the task. This, as I said, resembles to a certain extent mediation, the mediation task, which is a relatively new thing in Matura, in the exam. I know that when it was introduced, or before it was introduced, and we knew that it was going to be used in the exam, a lot of teachers were very unhappy about it because we're checking English with Polish, or we're checking English through Polish, or is at least the understanding of the text through Polish. And also there was this kind of feeling that it's going to be difficult with the learners. Now, when we look at the results from last year and from this year, we see that the mediation task is not that difficult, that students can go about it quite easily. But we know that the idea of the text is, again, to analyze and to synthesize what we have read, what the students have read. Because there are 4 texts, and then 4 different texts, and then, as you know, there's the text in Polish. So we've got something like that in the repetitorium. The whole double spread, the whole lesson, part of the lesson actually, is focusing on the mediation part, where we've got, as I said before, 4 different texts. One of them, the first one, text A, is the opinion poll about a particular theme. Then we move on to text B. This is just a fragment. The text is longer. It's about troubles on trains, different style of the text, as you could see. Then we've got the third one, which is a relatively shorter one. And then the last one, again, a different kind of text, different genre. And after reading them and after doing a simple comprehension check, the students are supposed to do the fill-in, a gap filling activity in Polish. We're familiar with it. We know what it's like. The students are familiar with it. The students know what it's like. So following on from the previous activity, from the previous idea, we could do something similar with this one. So doing the mediation activity with 4 different texts, with each learner reading only 1 text and writing down in Polish the gist and also some relevant details, but just relevant, just as in the previous activity, 2 or 3 sentences. And then you put the students together in groups of 4, each member representing a different text, and they read their write-ups or tell each other what the text was about and what information it contained. And again, we do it before the mediation task. So in a way, it is helping them out with the task. It is more like a process than the product activity here. Since a student has read just 1 text out of 4 and is familiar with only 1 text out of 4, then the other text, when they are being read, will become a bit more familiar, because the other students from the group would have told us about the content, about the main message, and about some relevant details. So if your students happen to have problems with the mediation activity, which I seriously doubt, but more importantly, if you would like to get them to read whatever text they are reading with more depth, then probably these two activities I've just shown you would be the way to go. Then moving on, I'm a big fan of extracting lexis from texts, and whenever I can, I'm suggesting different activities for taking out different kinds of expressions. Could be expressions, could be unfinished expressions, could be collocations, could be chunks, could be sayings, could be whatever actually, which is bigger than individual words from the text. So with this activity, which is called a nice expression log, it happens you do it after the students have done reading, and you ask them to write down 4-5 expressions from the text they have read, and then you put them together in small groups, and then you ask them to compare their expressions. As a group, they have to choose only 3 that they consider the best. They can vote. They can argue about them, about the validity of the expressions selected, and then the teacher collects those winning expressions from each group and puts them on the board, puts them on the screen, and asks the learners to write those expressions at the back of the notebooks. At the back of the notebooks, meaning that in the notebook they'll be writing things they're usually writing in class, like the answers to the questions, grammar rules, whatever. And at the back, you ask them to have this nice expressions log. Since you're controlling the expressions, there's nothing wrong with testing them every now and then, just to kind of reinforce some effort on the side of the learners. But the good thing about it is that if we are forcing, in a way, the learners to focus on those nice expressions, they'll start noticing them. Usually they're not noticing those expressions. So we help them in noticing those expressions. Obviously, at the beginning, the teacher's role will be more demanding than later, because you will have to help them out with what expressions you mean. Probably it will be a good idea to model the activity first with the learners. But after you've done it 4 or 5 times, the learners will, or should be able, not will, but should be able to notice such expressions themselves. And we know that noticing is the very first stage of learning. Once you notice something, then it kind of remember it, and then it's easier to retrieve the whole expression rather than, or the whole collocation or the whole chunk, rather than trying to coin it yourself, which is always difficult, challenging, and the students are likely to make mistakes when they're trying to put them together themselves. With reading and listening, priming is essential. What is priming? I mean, priming is used in advertising. Priming is basically, it's some from psychology, and it means kind of preparing the students for a particular event, for a particular context. And with reading and listening, if you know what text the students are going to read, you can ask them to do something which is related to the reading passage or the listening passage prior to doing the task. So what is this priming all about? Priming your brain, as you see the picture shows. Before reading the text, you can ask them to Google some information which is related to it. So you give them the idea, you give them some kind of phrase or a concept or a name, and you ask them to Google some information about it. And again, if your school allows the use of mobile phones, you could do it in class. It should take like 5-6 minutes of the classroom time. If your school does not really allow for the use of mobile phones, then this could be a homework activity before you do the reading or the listening with the students. And then what happens that in pairs they compare their findings. So they should take notes prior to that. They should list some bits and bobs, and then in small groups they are just comparing the findings, and then they do the reading or they do the listening. So what happens there is that because the students have Googled some information which is related to the theme of the text or the listening passage, reading or listening will have become part of their experience as they are going about it. So what it means is that you don't read something which is completely new and completely alien to you, but you read something which is familiar. And we know that familiarity breeds content. That familiarity allows them to be more efficient when it comes to understanding what is being read. So comprehension is enhanced, both reading and listening comprehension. And to illustrate it with an example, I've got a short fragment of the text called Mind Matters. The text is bigger, but I didn't want to put the whole thing for you on the screen because you wouldn't be able to see it. It's called Mind Matters, and that's how it goes. Describing the Human Brain Project, neurologist Henry Markram said, "It's so unique that I can call it revolutionary. Nothing quite like it exists yet, but we have begun building it." What he was referring to was a biologically realistic and detailed model of a working human brain hosted on a network of supercomputers. And as you could see, this text might not be that accessible, especially to those weaker learners. So to make sure that it is accessible, or at least more accessible, and easier to process, easier to read, and easier to do the task that follows, what you do before the class or at the beginning of the class, if you can, is to ask the learners to actually Google Human Brain Project. And this is the first hit that you get. Human Brain Project, what has been achieved, overview, highlights and achievements, Human Brain Project, and eBrain's scientific strategy and vision. And the students, when they are Googling that, they decide which aspects to read about, whether they would like to read the whole thing, or whether they'd like to be just selective, or whether they'd like to just skate through it. It doesn't really matter, because then if you ask them to read the text on Human Brain Project, suddenly it becomes familiar to them, and due to its familiarity, it's easier to process, and as I said before, it's more accessible. And every reading passage or every listening activity lends itself to that. So you can always find something in the text that, you know, a concept, an idea, some lexical chunk, a name, and ask the students to Google that and to see what information they get, to have this comparing activity stage before reading, and then when they are reading the text, it suddenly becomes something easier and something more accessible. Moving on to listening, I'll have a sip of water, if you will. Not too many things though, because, you know, listening is not that revolutionary. The first skill, as people call it, not really a fan of doing that, but I know we have to do that because it's part of the exam. I've got 2 ideas, or 2.5 ideas, if we consider the priming activity with reading and listening. These 2 I'm going to show you, I'm going to share with you. They refer to how we can get the students to work on a dialogue. So anytime you do a dialogue with the learners, or an activity that involves a listening activity that involves a dialogue, you could try out one of the 2 activities that I'm going to talk about right now. The first one happens after the task, and it's based on the script. So you will have to either, if you're using the ebook, either show the script on the screen, or perhaps scan it or take a photo of it and show it on the screen during the class. And before students start working on the dialogue, you just focus on some back channels. Back channels are those little things that we always insert in conversations, and they show that you are with the speaker, that you're listening, that you're attentive. And these involve such things as really, no, amazing, I hear you, and so on and so forth. So I'm sure that if you Google back channels, you will find more examples of that. And what happens is that after the task, obviously, the typical listening matura task, the students in pairs work on the dialogue and they enhance it with those back channels. So they decide where they would fit, they decide how many, which ones, and so on and so forth. And then once they've done it, you can ask them to perform some parts of the dialogue with those back channels. Also, if you do it, or if you do it more than once, back channels realized as lexical phrases or words will become part of the student's lexicon. Meaning that whenever they are engaged in conversations, whenever they do the task, for example, the matura task, speaking task, which is the interactive one, those kind of think bubbles speaking task. If they use back channels, when, for example, the examiner is saying something to them, then I'm sure the impression is that the candidate, the learner, is more naturalistic in the use of that spoken language. So it's nice from the perspective of real communication, and also nice from the perspective of the exam setting. Then the second one, which is also based on a dialogue and is also done after you've done all this battery of listening activities with a task. You focus on a short fragment of a dialogue, 6, maybe 8 turns. And to clarify things, a turn is basically a line that a speaker is using. So it's not necessarily a sentence, it's everything that speaker A, for example, says before speaker B joins in. So you choose such a fragment with 6 to 8 turns, and again you have to show it on the screen. So if you're using the ebook, then no problem. If you are not using an ebook, then you could take a photograph of that, put it on the screen, or put it on the board, if you will, if you want to write it down. And then what happens is that you're practicing reading it with the learners. So basically what you do, you just go old school with it. You read it, you read a turn, and then the students follow. You read another turn, the students follow. You're paying attention to accuracy, you're paying attention to intonation, you're paying attention to pronunciation, you're paying attention to rhythm, to the pace, and so on and so forth. And then what happens is that you blank one full turn. So if the dialogue consists of, say, 6 turns, then you blank, say, the second one. So now what happens is that you begin to kind of role play the dialogue with the students. So you read turn 1, and the students have to remember the blanked turn 2. And they have to read it out loud. Of course, at the beginning, they will not be that successful. So you go back to the original, practice that with the learners, then show the blank one, and do it again and again. And you continue like that. So you continue blanking the turns and practicing the turns with the students, with the idea of the students being able to remember the whole fragment that you had chosen at the end of the activity. It's funny, it's collaborative, meaning that we've got this kind of peer teaching or peer learning thing going on. So if you don't remember exactly what a particular word is in a line because you just slip your mind, then the others help you because they're likely to remember that, and you will just join them in. And then once you have practiced the whole fragment of the dialogue with these blanks, then you ask the students to work together in pairs and perform the dialogue from what they remember. There's a good chance that at the end of the day, they will remember something from the dialogue by heart. And obviously, it's all up to you what fragment of the dialogue you would choose. I would choose something which has some kind of universal conversational phrases, and by universal conversational phrases, I mean those which could be used in other contexts, in other settings. So moving on to writing. Another problematic skill, I would say, because we very often treat writing as a product and very rarely treat writing as a process. And there's a number of reasons for it. Reason number one is obviously that we are focusing on the product because the exam is the product. And reason number two is that we're not really big fans of marking the writing done by the learners. So I'm going to show you some kind of tricks of the trade concerning writing, how we can use it and how we can kind of turn it from more product oriented to more process oriented, where the product will be the final outcome of the process. And again, focusing on the activity from our repetitorium, again, the product-based part, the Twój ruch part, where after the whole battery of activities, the students are supposed to do something based on that. So they have to write a short discursive essay from 200 to 250 words. And it's about filming people in public spaces. Is it justified or is it unjustified? And obviously, there are lots of preparation stages for the learners. There are different activities focusing on different aspects of it. So we've got something similar, a similar discursive essay, but on a different topic. We've got some sort of a checklist that we might be looking at. We might to draw students' attention to before they get to writing their own essay. So we want them to write things, to write down this discursive essay from 200 to 250 words, including the stuff from the checklist. And obviously, with any kind of writing, we can predict the language. We know the theme, we know the topic, so we know it's going to be a discursive essay, so we know we're going to have 4 paragraphs, more or less, the introductory one, the one for, the one against, and the one which kind of puts it all together, focusing most likely on the balance aspect of things. So for predicting the language, obviously I could predict the language myself, but I chose to ask ChatGPT for it. I find ChatGPT a fantastic pedagogic tool if used properly. Probably the learners would like to start off their essay with the word nowadays, very likely. Yeah. So I asked ChatGPT to find alternatives for nowadays, and it would suggest things like in today's world, at present, in the 21st century, in our time, in the age of technology, or in this day and age. So these are the things that you could pre-teach before the students start writing their discursive essays. Again, I should have made it clear a bit earlier in the presentation that I do not believe in asking the students to write whatever form at home, because we know what will happen. Yeah? Not in all cases, but in many cases. So probably a better idea would be to do it in class and also prepare the students for it, making sure that they have all the tools which are necessary for the writing task. So we've got nowadays that we can predict, or in our contemporary world, we can predict something like, cameras are everywhere. And again, as a teacher, I would ask ChatGPT to give me other ways of saying that. Things like we often find ourselves under surveillance while in public spaces. Being in public spaces often means being with the range of cameras. We often find ourselves within the reach of cameras when in public spaces. The presence of cameras in public spaces become commonplace. Then we've got people not liking cameras for whatever reasons. And again, we could ask ChatGPT to give us alternatives to that one. So, it raises concerns about privacy, invades personal privacy. People have a right to privacy. Surveillance can make people feel uneasy. So you probably get the idea. Yeah, you kind of predict the conceptual aspect of students writing. There will be no kind of revolutionary ideas there. People don't like them, but on the other hand, it's safe, blah, blah, blah. It prevents crime. So these are the kind of general concepts that we can predict. We could ask ChatGPT to suggest alternatives for those, and we could practice them with the learners so they can use them in their writing. People don't like cameras. I think we've just people raises concerns about privacy, invades personal privacy. People have a right to privacy. Surveillance can make people feel uneasy. Sorry, I've pressed it too quickly, and so on and so forth. This is the process part, which leads to the product part. The product is the actual essay, and the process would be all those preparation stages, including the ones which are shown in the repetitorium, like the checklist, like the model essay that the learners are analyzing, and then your chip would be to suggest things, to suggest some kind of language bits, language chunks that the learners could use in their writing. Moving on to speaking, and I've got 7 minutes left, so I should not go over time this time. With speaking, obviously, speaking is the most important skill. It's why we're learning foreign languages. It's, even if you ask somebody, can you use any foreign language? You ask them, do you speak Romanian? Do you speak Turkish? And not do you write in Turkish, for example. So it's important to focus on that. It's important to do it as much as we can in the classroom. And I would like to offer you different ways of focusing on preparing the learners for speaking. Excuse me. By looking at different other resources than what you can find in course books. So one of the YouTube channels, which I find particularly useful, is called English. And one of the clips I would highly recommend would be common English phrases to keep your conversation going, and to give you some flavor of what you can find in there is, I completely lost my train of thought. Hopefully it will come back to me in a moment. Think of the exam situation, or think of the communicative situation where this could be used. Perhaps someone else would like to jump in. That's more communicative than exam. What's your take? Again, more real life than the exam setting. I'd rather not answer that if that's okay. Nothing wrong with saying that at the exam. I don't think I'm being very clear. Let me try that again. Again, a very nice strategy at the exam if something goes not as planned. Never mind, it might come back to me in a minute, or I'm sorry, I had a mental blank. So, it's just a few examples of the phrases that can be found in this particular clip in the English channel. And with those expressions, again, you could ask your students to watch it, to take notes when they're watching that at home, and then you could check it in class. So you could match the expressions to the functions, like you use it when you can't remember the exact word, and the students have to match the right phrase, or you could present the learners with the functional descriptors, and ask them to write expressions. So it's not just a matching activity, but they have to remember the actual expression. So you use it when you can't remember the exact word, and then they have to write. I had a mental blank, for example. You could give the learners randomly chosen expressions and ask them to provide functional descriptions. So something opposite to what we've had in the previous one. So pretty useful stuff, both from the perspective of real life communication and in the exam setting, in the exam context. Very natural, very nice, very conversational. Another one, which I think might be a good idea is something I call topic race. And again, here ChatGPT comes to help me. Sorry. I asked it to generate some topics that could be used for discussions in the classroom setting, in a foreign language classroom setting. And what I got was not something I wasn't really happy with because they were very kind of general, highly general, or generalized even. And I wanted something specific. I wanted something like a topic. So if you want to use ChatGPT to generate topics, probably a better idea would be to ask it to write statements and not topics. Anyway, back to the topic, right? So I asked it to generalize topics on different themes. We know we've got those 14 themes or domains as we call them, that we follow in our education based on the Common European Framework of Reference. And what happens with this activity is that the students are asked to work in pairs and discuss a topic. For example, AI's impact on society is minuscule. Probably you'd need to pre-teach the word minuscule if necessary. However, what happens is that the students have 1 minute or 2 minutes, you decide, to discuss it. And in this time slot, each of them has to contribute. So it's not that, there's 1 minute to discuss a topic and only one person does the talking, but within this 1 minute, both have to chip in. And after 1 minute, you give them another topic. So 1 minute or 2 minutes are gone, then move on to another one, which is completely different. Social media shape public opinion and social behavior more than anything. 1 minute, both of you talk, 1 minute is gone. Topic number 3, education is the most conservative sphere of life. Promoting sustainability will not affect our lives in any way. Gender equality is against human nature. Living in a multicultural society is more enriching. Cultural traditions should adapt to modern values. Censorship is mandatory to maintain social order. AI will do more harm than good in the long run, and so on and so forth. You could continue for as long as you want, and for as many topics as you have prepared for this activity. Anyway, the idea behind it is that it teaches the learners, or it gives them training in quick responses, which I believe is quite important in the exam setting, but also in the real life communication. So, you hear something, you're part of a discussion, or you're in the exam room and have to respond to something, and you've got to be quick. So this teaches you, or gives you training more than teaches you, in those quick responses. Because you have only 1 minute, because topics change, and those changes are quite unexpected when it comes to what the students are going to talk about next. Obviously, it might be a good idea to prepare the students for it from the perspective of language. So you might think of what language you might want to give them. And again, this is something which I have generated from ChatGPT, so I'm kind of a ChatGPT addict, some of you may think. So things like, anyone would like to chip in with some ideas, or can I go ahead with the topic, or it's not really my scene, if I'm being totally honest, but to address this issue, we should look at it from at least 2 angles. Funny that you bring it up, because something happened to me recently, very much in line with this topic, and so on and so forth. So what happens is that you practice that before the topic race activity. And by practicing, I mean, being fluent and using the right intonation and rhythm with those. So it's more like pronunciation practice with the learners. And obviously, the sky's the limit with this. But this, the benefit of that activity is that when an examiner hears this kind of language used by the learner, they will have to be impressed, period. I should be coming to an end. It seems I have overplanned the presentation, and I will go over time by 1 minute only, okay? So maybe instead of talking about something which I talked at the PACE conference, I'm going to Yeah, I'm going to show you two more things. One thing is something I call "What are you talking around?" and that's basically disassembling the topic. I do believe in discussing topics, because once you discuss, if you can discuss a topic, you can discuss anything. A sense of humor is not inborn, but it's shaped by a number of factors. That's something I did with my students, and I asked them not to really talk about this topic in pairs or in groups, but I asked them to focus on the specifics or specific aspects of this. So, for example, what is it? Is it possible to define? Are there any other options that being inborn or not being inborn? If it's shaped by other factors, then what factors are those? And so on and so forth. So the idea is that very often you don't know what to say. So this helps you in practicing some or developing some strategies as to how not to talk about something, but how to talk around it. And again, any topic can be dismantled, any topic can be disassembled. Lastly, one thing, again, sorry for, yeah, okay. Kind of jumping from slide to slide, but as I said before, I just like talking, and I probably talk too much, and I've overplanned the presentation. What I do with my students is the film club. I call it the film club, and we just watch different movies. They have to watch them at home, and we talk about them like, they have to assess the movie on a scale. They have to talk about the questions I would have prepared before the class, and then we just talk about it. What I did once is something which has got a one sentence, in fact, a two-sentence review of the film they have watched. So each student had to write, using the Google platform, the Docs Google platform, had to write one sentence which is positive about the movie, and one sentence which is negative about the movie. We put them all together, and then, some examples: true love, father to son. The characters were hilarious and likable, especially Nathan and Gaz. I completely fell in love with the language. The movie gives a hilarious view on themes such as unemployment and masculinity. I like the complexity of the characters, and some negative ones. And the idea was that the students had to put all those sentences chosen by myself, both the good ones and the bad ones, in a review writing task. Obviously, they had to manipulate with the language. They had to think about the structure. So this probably could go quite nicely with the writing task on with this discursive essay, the foreign against essay, where they have to kind of learn how to put together the ideas which are positive and negative. And obviously, I understand that you would not be able to get the students to watch a movie that's 90 minutes. They are longer these days, but short films are quite nice. I found one quite recently, which I really like a lot. It's called Alternative Math. It's about a teacher in primary school in the States, whose child, a kid student, said that 2 + 2 is 22. And then there was the whole thing about it. Like, the parents came in and they said that, the child has a right to have a different opinion. Then the principal came and said that the teacher should apologize because the child has a right to have a different opinion, and so on and so forth. I will not give you any spoilers, but this is a nice one to do with your students. Alma is a Spanish one, which is a great choice as well. No language there, it's just animated. And basically what I would do is just to go to YouTube and type in best short movies 2023, 2022, 2024, whatever. And I'm sure you'll find something which will be appropriate for your students. They usually last from 5 to 12 minutes. So time-wise, they're pretty much manageable. And the very last thing...
Piotrze, przepraszam, że się wtrącam, ale mamy już mało czasu.
Okay, the last thing. That's the last thing, the last minute. Okay, and I'm done. Pronunciation issues or pronunciation problems. If you look at the list of those words, I'm sure you know where I'm standing. I'm sure you know what kind of problems there are. Like develop becomes develop, development, area, event, professor, etc. And I use the Teams platform and ChatGPT to get the students to kind of sort out those pronunciation problem. So I asked ChatGPT, for example, to generate sentences with the word develop in different forms, like developing, development, developed, underdeveloped, etc. And I gave them to the learners, and I asked the learners to record those sentences and then put them on the Teams platform, hoping that they'll be pronounced correctly. If not, then they'll have to record again, and again, when I'm making sure that I'm happy with the outcome. I know that Teams was used during the pandemic, but I'm sure that your school still have access to it and use it. So there's nothing wrong with restarting using it again for the sake of getting students to record things. Sorry for going over time. It's still 4 minutes before the French talk begins. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a good year. Thank you.
Ja również bardzo dziękuję Tobie, Piotrze, za ciekawy wykład i garść wskazówek przed rozpoczęciem roku szkolnego i Państwu za obecność, ale muszę się już pożegnać, żeby nauczyciele z języka francuskiego mogli wejść na swój wykład. Do widzenia.